Trying to get through it.
Laura.
Can you imagine how horrifying it would have been to help organize the first
Yeah.
I mean, like in the back end or something.
Yes, yes. Him and Mr. and AC are going to share 5 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Sorry to hound you yesterday.
No, it's but,
I know.
you know the processes we have to go through to get it approved.
I do. I owned you for this. So you can blame them.
Good idea. I'm glad you're over here.
Yeah. As you know. Morning comes.
I do, but I've been there before. And no, we may get a different map out by the end of the month. But I got my office open in San Antonio, going full force.
San Antonio is new.
50% of the district is new, and 50% is old. Hi, how are you? I'm sorry I missed you all last night. And I'm sure you all met Senator Waiver. Good. Sure, I'm glad that you're going to be here. That's fine. Right. It's going to help. Look forward to hearing you all. Good to see you, Ron.
Hey, Lloyd. Sometime I'd like to pick your brain about the tax reform.
Eager to do that. I know you've worked so hard through the years, and I'm working hard now to be sure I'm going to help you this year.
Thank you all for joining us today. Today's hearing is on the President's proposals to help the long-term unemployed get back to work, which are part of his latest jobs plan. There's certainly bipartisan agreement on that goal of getting people back to work, but we need to do a better job helping all of the unemployed return to work, because today's short-term unemployed workers risk becoming tomorrow's long-term unemployed. For example, one of America's 14 million unemployed workers, Ms. Dawn Dean, will testify shortly about her experience since being laid off in June. She's not a long-term unemployed, but why should we wait until she reaches that stage before she gets effective help in getting back to work? Yet that's largely what the President's latest plan proposes, starting with its call to extend unemployment benefits for up to 99 weeks for another year. That has a familiar ring because this would be the 10th extension since mid-2008. That's left a long track record of assessing whether extending unemployment benefits will create jobs, as some have claimed. For instance, then Speaker Nancy Pelosi last year said, extending unemployment benefits is one of the biggest stimuluses to our economy. It creates jobs faster than almost any other initiative that you can name. But in reality, since federal extended benefits began, the unemployment rate rose from 5.6 to 9.1%, and over 6 million jobs disappeared. Federal benefits have already added $180 billion to the deficit, and today we are being asked by the President to spend another $50 billion next year. Other proposals in this plan have a familiar ring, too. For example, like provisions in the Democrats' 2009 stimulus law, the President's latest plan proposes more temporary federal funds if states adopt UI policies dozens of states already support. If these programs have merit, and many states already use them, why must the federal government again spend billions of dollars for other states to adopt them, too? There's no free lunch here. The administration has proposed new taxes on job creators to pay for this new spending, but Senate Democrats have already rejected some of those. Meanwhile, the administration's budget, which is unanimously rejected in the other body, called for nearly $60 billion in permanently higher unemployment taxes on jobs in the coming decade. It's hard to see how permanently higher taxes on jobs will help the unemployed get back to work. The President's plan is noteworthy for steps it does not take, such as providing states more flexibility over UI funds so fewer people become long-term unemployed. This committee approved such UI waiver authority to the states earlier this year. Just last week, President Obama signed into law a bill co-sponsored by my friend Mr. Doggett, among others, to provide states waiver authority in child welfare programs. I had the privilege of being in the Oval Office last Friday to see that bill enacted into law, and that shows that we can make progress from a bipartisan perspective, focusing on the process and the real economics and opportunities to help people move forward. If states can be trusted to design better programs for children at risk of abuse and neglect, can't they be trusted to test ways to better help the unemployed get back to work using their own state funds? Other important reforms are missing too, like strengthening work search and better engaging unemployed workers in training, reforms that were needed even before the recession. The good news is these sorts of improvements to help all unemployed workers can and should be included in any legislation enacted this year to help the unemployed return to work. I look forward to working with my colleagues and the administration to that end, and welcome all of our witnesses today to discuss how we can craft the most effective policies to do just that. Without objection, each member will have the opportunity to submit a written statement and have it included in the record at this point. And I'd like to yield now to my friend Lloyd Doggett. Do you care to make an opening statement?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This is an opportunity to review the proposals of the President to assist the unemployed find work and to listen to the creative recommendations of our colleagues. Today in America, the problem that we face is not the unemployed, but unemployment. Too many Americans remain unemployed because of lack of work, not for their lack of wanting to work. We must stop the blame the victim approach of just blaming unemployment on the unemployed. Thus far this year, we've yet to vote in the House on a single meaningful jobs bill, and threats of default on our debt and threats to shut down the government only set back our economic recovery and cost us more jobs. There's a great difference in this country between what happens to some unemployed citizens. Those at the top of the economic ladder don't need to worry about unemployment insurance. Last month, the executive at Hewlett-Packard, HP, got a $13 million golden parachute after he was dismissed when his company's stock price fell by half. But for the rest of America, and particularly the working age poor, of whom we have more than at any time in about 50 years, things are considerably different. As luxury goods fly off the shelves at some specialty stores, Walmart has reduced the size of its toilet tissue rolls because so many people can't afford to buy the old size. When folks lose a job through no fault of their own, the least we ought to do is extend a lifeline. In examining the provisions of the President's Americans Jobs Act relating to unemployment, there are several new initiatives that merit our study. If Congress fails to act by December 31st on extending unemployment insurance benefits, more than 2 million people will lose their unemployment assistance by the middle of February. And throughout next year, a total of 6 million Americans will be without assistance. The President's proposal is a good place to start in addressing this problem. This doesn't mean I think that every aspect of his proposal has the right answers or that he even has the best answers on all aspects of this problem. But I especially emphasize the need to extend unemployment assistance at this time of continued economic downturn. Terminating unemployment assistance would hurt our nation's economy by further suppressing consumer demand and confidence. The Economic Policy Institute has estimated that allowing the extended federal unemployment program to expire would cost this country over 500,000 jobs. This amounts to a double whammy for the unemployed. They lose their benefits and jobs become even more difficult to find. And there is near unanimity among economists that few government expenditures have more positive stimulative effect. It's true, it doesn't solve all the jobless problem in the country, but economists of all political stripes agree that one of the best ways to stimulate the economy is to make payments to those who have no choice but to spend those dollars immediately on the necessities of life. But things could get even worse for the unemployed if the proposal before the House Appropriations Committee to cut job training and unemployment services by 75% is effective. Finally, while there is much ballyhooing about the so-called Texas miracle, the unemployment rate in my state, 8.5%, stands higher today than at any time in the last quarter of a century. Our state is also a good example of what happens when ideological constraints and political imperatives produce decisions that harm both employers and employees. Let's hope that this hearing is just the first step in forging a stronger consensus that we must not abandon the millions of our neighbors who depend on unemployment insurance to make ends meet until they can be successful in securing a new job. Let's work together to move our economy forward and increase the opportunity for folks looking for work to find it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Doggett. Before we move on to our testimony, I'd like to remind our witnesses that all oral statements need to be limited to 5 minutes. However, without objection, all of the written testimony will be made part of the permanent record. On our panel today, we'll be hearing from several of our distinguished colleagues. First will be the Honorable Ron Wyden, Senator from Oregon. Welcome to the panel. The Honorable James Renacci of Ohio, accompanied by the Honorable Hanson Clark of Michigan. Thank you all for joining us today. Senator Wyden, please proceed with your remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be with you and Congressman Doggett. I had a chance to serve in the House of Representatives, so it's good to be back. And let me first of all say I'm going to spare you the filibuster this morning. And if I could just make my prepared remarks a part of the record, perhaps just kind of summarize a few thoughts.
Without objection. Thank
you, Mr. Chairman. I particularly appreciate the way you, Mr. Chairman, and others are looking at trying to find a bipartisan way to make some changes in the unemployment system, to provide more opportunities for our workers, folks that are hurting, to get ahead. And what I want to do is just start this brief discussion by my belief that this isn't our grandparents' job market. I think we all understand that we saw our grandparents and our parents very often get caught up in the business cycle. You'd have bad weather, there'd be an increase in the price of raw materials, something like that. They'd be unemployed for a few months, 6 to 8 months, but their jobs would come back. We know today a lot of these jobs are not coming back, and we have to start with that kind of basic proposition. And so I come to offer the theory that in a bipartisan way we could start with the proposition that a significant number of folks who are unemployed are essentially today treading water in the unemployment system with no way of getting ahead. And these are folks who now have one of two choices. They got these two choices, which aren't particularly good for them, and they aren't particularly good for taxpayers. And that means that they can take their unemployment check and keep looking for jobs that no longer exist. Or they can take their unemployment check and go into a training program that is not as valuable as the knowledge in their head and their work ethic in their body. So what I'd like to suggest is that on a bipartisan basis, we look at the idea of reforming the unemployment system to give these folks, as many who are qualified to do so, the opportunity to get off the treadmill and combine these marketable skills that they've often picked up in decades of employment in the private sector and go out and use those skills and their work ethic to become entrepreneurs, to become self-employed in the private sector where they're going to be paying taxes and often putting others to work. Now, I want colleagues to know that I don't think this is for everybody. I'm not suggesting you can be unemployed and just kind of walk in and say to the UI office, I'm going to go set up a biotech company or something of that nature. But if you look around the country at what we've done in the last 15 years with these programs on a small scale, and I authored it in the 1980s, we see people setting up welding shops. We see folks doing innovative work in wood products, in technology. Recently, 2 unemployed fellows in my hometown of Portland started a technology company, Urban Airship, and they are doing pioneering work with new mobile apps. And they've got people all over the country interested in their mobile applications. So these jobs pay good wages. We're turning folks into entrepreneurs, and there are other kinds of benefits, and I'll close with this, Mr. Chairman. A study by the Department of Labor found that self-employment participants were 19 times more likely than eligible non-participants to be self-employed at some point after being unemployed, and even more importantly, they were 4 times more likely to obtain employment of any kind whatsoever. And the average cost of these jobs was $3,350. So we can continue to go back and forth, Democrats and Republicans punching on each other about the idea of job creation that costs many, many times that level, or we can find a way in a bipartisan fashion to do it. What we've done is put in what I think are realistic limits. You could have about 1% of your folks have the opportunity to be a part of it. You'd have a limitation of the number of weeks in which you could get your unemployment check while you're setting this up. And I just appreciate the tone that you're setting, Mr. Chairman. And Congressman Doggett has worked, as he mentioned, with this bill that was signed recently in a bipartisan way. And let me break the speechifying off here and just know that I'd be very much interested in being part of this bipartisan approach y'all are trying to cultivate.
Thank you, Senator Wyden. Much of what you mentioned, it fits the spirit of legislation that we worked on back in the spring regarding issues like this, and we'll look forward to continuing that dialogue. Thank you very much. Congressman Renacci and Clark.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Doggett, and members of the subcommittee. I'd like to thank you for hosting today's hearing on moving from unemployment checks to paychecks, and for inviting me to testify. It is my hope that today's hearing will provide the subcommittee with actionable information for getting our nation's unemployed back to work. The dire unemployment situation currently gripping the United States has been an inescapable reality for several years. Unemployment data for the month of August showed 0 jobs added and a sustained unemployment rate of over 9%. The next report on job creation, or unfortunately the lack thereof, is due on October 7th, but there is little reason for optimism. However, the tools we need to overcome the economic downturn are already at our disposal, the most valuable of which is unemployment insurance. Significant employment opportunities can be created by allowing the states to leverage unemployment insurance into job creation. There is no silver bullet to returning America back to work, but creating an incentive for both employers and job seekers through unemployment insurance is an important first step. I have introduced a bill with bipartisan support entitled Employ Act H.R. 2137 that would create this dual incentive. The unemployment benefit to the business, the Employ Act would allow states to develop an optional program for providing a percentage of the unemployment benefit to a business willing to hire an individual at a rate higher than the normal benefit amount. The purpose of this program is simple: provide businesses with an incentive to hire through reduced risk, provide individuals with an incentive to work through increased pay, and reduce costs to the government by paying only a percentage of the unemployment benefit to the eligible businesses. As stated, the Employ Act is not a panacea for the joblessness crisis the United States is currently facing, but it is a crucial step in the right direction. I again thank the subcommittee for inviting me to testify here today, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have. I also look forward to hearing the ideas presented by my colleagues here today.
Congressman Clark.
Chairman Davis, Ranking Member Doggett, subcommittee members, my name is Hanson Clark. I represent the metropolitan region in this country that has lost more jobs than any region over the last 10 years, metropolitan Detroit. People in Metro Detroit, they need work. They're desperate for work. This Employ Act would provide the people that I represent a chance to get on-the-job training, but also an opportunity to get a job long-term. This is important. I'm going to be brief. When you put folks in Metro Detroit back to work, even though our area has been so hard hit economically, we have the best manufacturing know-how still we've got a great trained workforce. When you put our folks in Detroit back to work, you put this country back to work. We can create more new advanced manufacturing jobs. But I'm not here just talking to you today as a member of Congress representing Michigan's 13th District. I also want to share with you my experience during the last Great Recession that we had here in this country during the 1980s. I was a young man in my early 20s. I had already lost my family. They had died by the time I was 19. I had no brothers and sisters. I had dropped out of college. I'd been out for years. And I lost my income. I lost my food stamps, and then I gave up completely. I knew that there was no way I was going to be able to make it in life. This is the tremendous tragedy right now with folks who are unemployed. I know that feeling. I could see it in their eyes. People in Detroit are tough, but they've given up. They don't think that they have a chance anymore. This Employee Act gives people some confidence in themselves by putting them back to work, putting them in a work situation where they can work with a team. They can see that the value that they have to a company, to themselves, and to this country. The other reason why I wanted to be here today, I wanted to show this Congress and to show this country that a Republican like Jim, a Democrat like me, that we can work together and we're committed to put our people back to work. This bill is not perfect, but nothing in this country is. But it's a clear statement. Here's a way that we can provide an incentive for employers to hire people who need money, but also need faith, faith in themselves and faith in what this country is all about. Giving everyone an equal chance, not a guarantee, but a chance to pursue happiness, to actually live your life as fully as you can. So I really appreciate you giving us this opportunity. I want to let, again, this country know Democrats and Republicans are willing to work together to put you back to work. That's why Jim and I are here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Congressman Clark. We appreciate your sentiments. Does anybody have any questions for our colleagues on the panel? I'd like to thank Senator Wyden and Congressman Renacci Clark for joining us today, sharing your insights. The one thing I also would like to do is extend the invitation to continue to work with all of you. We look forward to this dialogue as we move forward, and thank you very much. That concludes our first panel. And for our second panel, we'll be hearing from the Honorable Jane Oates, Assistant Secretary of Employment and Training of the Employment and Training Administration, U.S. Department of Labor.
Thanks, hon. Yep. Oh.
Welcome, Secretary Oates, for another appearance before the subcommittee. You can go ahead and proceed with your testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Davis, Ranking Member Doggett, other members of the committee. Thanks for this opportunity to begin the discussion on the President's American Jobs Act. The Act draws on bipartisan ideas and proposes innovative changes to the unemployment insurance, the UI program. It gives states flexibility to implement innovative voluntary approaches to get long-term unemployed workers back to work and boost job creation, while also providing UI benefits to the long-term unemployed who continue to face challenges finding jobs. I know you all agree that getting people back to work is essential to our sustained recovery and our nation's economic strength. The UI reforms in the American Jobs Act are packaged to ensure unemployed workers have the benefits they need while searching for work, but also ensures that they have the necessary services and opportunities to get reemployed. The proposal couples a further extension of emergency unemployment compensation with full federal funding of the extended benefit program for 1 year with mandatory reemployment services and eligibility assessments for EUC claimants, and state flexibility to implement a menu of innovative reemployment strategies that would provide claimants with additional options if they chose to pursue them. The President's proposal will, by the end of 2012, prevent 6 million Americans from losing access to the benefits they need to sustain their families while they look for work. We know that without these life-sustaining benefits this past year, 3.2 million people would have slipped into poverty. At the same time, an extension of emergency unemployment benefits for a year bolsters consumer spending, which in turn fuels local economies by returning $2 in economic growth for every $1 in benefits paid. We know that the longer an individual is unemployed, the less likely that individual is to successfully return to work because their skills get rusty and they face the stigma of being long-term unemployed. The President is asking Congress to extend EUC and full federal funding for EB through the end of 2013. At the same time, the Act promotes rapid reemployment by requiring states to provide reemployment services and UI eligibility assessments similar to the Reemployment and Eligibility Assessment Initiative that 40 states currently operate. They would now provide this to all EUC recipients. States will provide these services in tandem, and we know this strategy works. Research shows that a combination of RES and REA activities reduces UI duration and saves trust fund dollars because claimants find jobs faster and ineligible claimants are identified, thus reducing improper payments. In addition to these important reemployment services, the American Jobs Act proposes the Reemployment Now initiative, which provides $4 billion to states through formula and gives states the flexibility to implement something from the menu of optional reemployment services, including state-developed models, while joining DOL in an evaluation of the models to inform future UI reforms. All of these options directly benefit long-term unemployed workers. The Bridge to Work program builds on and improves on programs such as Georgia Works and will permit EUC recipients to voluntarily engage in temporary work for up to 38 hours a week for up to 8 weeks while continuing to receive their EUC benefits. Those benefits in every state must be at least equal to the minimum wage in that state. Key worker protections are mandatory for both the EUC recipient and for employees at the participating employer. Bridge to Work is a win-win for both the EUC recipient and the employer, and we think it promotes job creation and hiring. Wage insurance will provide an incentive for older EUC recipients, 50 and above, to return to a labor market by taking a job that pays less than what they were making in their last job. Participants could be paid up to 50% of the difference in wages between the two jobs during a period of time determined by the state. Other initiatives in my oral testimony, as my time is running out, we can discuss during questioning, but I do want to end by saying that we think the American Jobs Act is a comprehensive package, and the President is urging Congress to enact it in its entirety, including, for example, the additional reemployment strategies that are pathways back to work that will be considered by other committees. I really hope this is the beginning of our discussion. I hope we can reach some common ground on this, and really hope we can get to something quickly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ms. Oates. I'll go ahead with the first question. According to the administration's most recent projections in the FY 2012 mid-session review released in September, to quote, the unemployment rate is projected to fall, but is not projected to fall below 6% until 2016. For reference, in 2008, our national unemployment rate hit a low of 4.9%. The administration also projects that at this time next year, the national unemployment rate will still be at 8.2%, which is, I think we'd agree, unacceptably high. Yet when we look at the proposals before us from the President, they generally propose help for the long-term unemployed through the end of 2012. Now the question, does this mean that if we pass the proposed 10th extension of UI benefits now, that a year from now, will you be back asking for an 11th extension of federal UI benefits and another infusion of one-time short-term stimulus funds to, quote, create jobs, unquote?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a fair question, but I don't have a crystal ball. With great respect, I think our hopes are that the proposals that we're putting forward here will reduce the number of people continuing into long-term unemployment, will accelerate people getting back to work, particularly when you look at the reemployment services that we're asking for and the assessments. We think that a number of people in your state and in every state across the country have been put out of work in a sector where there's no longer jobs for them. So we're hoping that these initiatives that we're proposing, and we'll work with you on trying to enact many, all, or some of them, we think it'll change the direction of people. We certainly think that something like the Recovery Act, while some people say it wasn't effective, I mean, we can certainly look at things like the state sustainability funds, which eliminated the need to lay off workers in 9 and 10 from states and municipal areas, and the resurgence of the auto industry. Likewise, I think this proposal will have real benefits. Do I think it's perfect? No, sir. I wouldn't say that to you. But I think together we can make it even better than it is now, and I look forward to working with you on that.
Okay, well, we have a mutual concern. There's a a couple of generations of statistical data that would suggest that when people pass that 2-year mark being unemployed, that it's very rare that they reemploy. And the question that we've tried to deal with over the course of this year is looking at ways to encourage working, especially with states, empowering frontline service providers, is to get them to work as quickly as possible so there's not a lag time that moves them away from the workforce, regardless of the issues surrounding that and the unique issues that Senator Wyden commented on. I certainly think he brought up some very creative ideas. We had a discussion on creative ideas that was very well received by the states that were a little bit different from this. But I guess a final question would be, why doesn't your proposal include permanent reforms to the UI program so that we always do a better job helping the recipients to work from the first week of collecting benefits instead of engaging largely after they've been unemployed for 6 months?
Well, I think, Mr. Chairman, you and I have had discussions about the fact that there's real need to work with this committee and the other chamber to look at long-term UI reform. Some of the things that we'd like to do in terms of solvency and improper payments, we're initiating as much as we can without statutory change. But I think that what we're hoping is...
Just to intercede, had we gotten our Jobs Act passed, you would have had the statutory authority to deal with the data exchange and issues there. Go ahead.
We appreciate that. But we want you to know that we're hoping that some of the ideas that we're proposing in this act, they contain an element that's been missing when states try to do this ad hoc on their own, and that's a strong evaluation piece. We're committed to you to evaluating anything that you give us the permission to do, so that a year from now, when you want to, if you are choosing to look at long-term underlying UI reform, we'll have real data, not anecdotal, not guesses, not political spin. We'll have data to share with you about what the promising ideas were that really did make a difference in getting people back to work.
Okay, thank you very much. Yield now 5 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, the distinguished ranking member, Mr. Doggett.
I thank the gentleman and the Secretary for her service. With reference to the Jobs Act, my recollection is that bill, though strongly urged in committee and strongly opposed by me and others in committee, was never brought by the House leadership to the House floor so that anything could be done on it. I'm thankful that it wasn't, because I think the unemployed need the assistance more than in my state. Governor Perry needs their money to pay off state bonds. But to focus, Madam Secretary, on your testimony, what do you believe the economic impact will be if we allow 2 million people to begin losing their unemployment insurance benefits in February, and a total of 6 million to lose their benefits, as you have testified, over the course of the next year?
I think one word would sum it up. It would be catastrophic. We would not only be pushing people into much more expensive safety net programs, but many of them would be entering programs like long-term disability that would be a mortgage that our country would have for decades to come. I think that the American people want to go to work, but when pushed to the wall, they're going to do what they have to do to support themselves, to keep a roof over their head and their families. So I think that we've already seen a disturbing growth in long-term unemployment numbers, and I think that unless we give people real options, real job options so that they can support themselves, they're going to find another way to do it. I mean, I do believe that we can reform our programs, but job creation is what we have to be about. There's 16 million unemployed people today, almost another 7 million working part-time that would like to work full-time, and by the best estimates, there's a little bit over 3 million jobs. That math doesn't add up. So I really hope that, you know, we don't look at that. We don't deny 6 million people in 2012 their benefits.
And really, if you look back over the decades through Republican administrations and Democratic administrations, when we have hit unemployment levels that are as high as they are today, have there usually been bipartisan efforts to extend unemployment benefits under that circumstance?
Yes, sir. Looking at the history, the last time long-term federally supported unemployment benefits were eliminated, the unemployment rate was about 7.2%. There's never been a time in history when Congress has not included extensions when the unemployment rate was at 9%.
And I know, as I said in my opening statement, there are those who want to blame the unemployed for unemployment, but aren't we in a circumstance today where there are more than 4 unemployed Americans for every job opening?
Yes, sir. And that's the national average. In some areas, even those areas represented on this committee, that number's doubled.
And in that circumstance, what will be the effect if the effort last week by Republicans on the Appropriations Committee to slash the Workforce Investment Act by 75%, almost eliminated? What will the effect be on employment services, on job training, and opportunities for those unemployed individuals to find the work that they want?
Well, I'd love to give you a direct answer to that, sir, but clearly the way the bill is written with changing program year to fiscal year in some parts of the bill and not others make it almost impossible to give you an accurate answer. But at the minimum, it would cut our services at least by 50% and perhaps up to 90% in some programs. What would that mean in Texas? It would probably mean that Larry Temple, your director of workforce programs, would probably have to close 80% of the one-stops. 80%.
That doesn't seem to me to be a very creative way to address this problem. I do have some concerns about the bridge to work that copies Georgia Works. I like the sound and theory of the program, but at least one analysis I have seen shows that after a couple of months of providing employers free work, only about 10% of those workers find permanent employment. Is that the record, and is there anything you do in the Bridge to Work proposal to try to ensure that we get better worker placement after providing weeks of free labor?
First of all, the Georgia Works program and the other programs in Missouri and North Carolina, in New Hampshire, don't use UI money, so therefore we don't have a lot of accurate data on them. What we can tell you in studies that we've done, that people who do active work search actually have done twice as well in getting placed in jobs. So when we propose this as an option, because we fully recognize that some people are sending out hundreds of resumes and not getting one interview, we hear that desperation whenever Secretary Solis and I travel individually or together. We think that some people really would like a chance to show what they have, what their worth is to an employer. So in addition to giving them this opportunity, we would first exhaust the resources of the Wagner-Pizer system and the employment service system by making sure they get an accurate assessment, they get face-to-face attention from someone so that they know that they're getting the best in terms of work search information. I think that by beefing up the basics, the work search, the job counseling, the labor market information, and adding other options, we're responding to good ideas from around the country. So I think the pairing of them may give us the best options.
Great. Thank you very much. The gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes Mr. Paulson from Minnesota for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, thanks for being here this morning. And first of all, thanks for your comments early or at the end of your testimony, just saying that this is, from your view, the beginning of a discussion and wanting to work to find common ground on some significant challenges before us. And I think, as the Chairman had mentioned, we've some proposals have already passed out of this subcommittee or out of the Ways and Means Committee. So my understanding now is that the President's latest plan now that is before us, and some of the folks in the administration, by the way, are saying, look, you need to vote on this plan as it is. There's not room for modifications. That's why I really appreciate your comments here today. But this is the latest plan now that essentially will extend UI benefits for the 10th time for up to 99 weeks for one more year at a cost of about $44 billion, and there's another $10 billion or so in some other sort of one-time stimulus-like programs that would also go onto the deficit. But I want to go back to some of the testimony that was received back in March from the Inspector General at the Department of Labor. And at that time, the testimony was centered around reporting an 11.2% improper payment rate for unemployment insurance benefits. And that represents about $16.5 billion in overpayments, about $936 million in underpayments. And I think one of the issues that the Inspector General rose was that the unemployment improper payment reduction plan did not include specific targets for preventing these improper payments or details on how to meet certain targets, both for the Department of Labor and for the states. And they also mentioned, as we previously recommended, the Department of States must identify these strategies to maximize opportunities here, especially maximizing the use of the national directory. And I guess just in summary, so knowing that $17 billion in overpayments or improper payments have been made, which is a record high, and your Inspector General has essentially come out and said, look, the Department of Labor and the states have not identified the strategies that are necessary to target these improper payments. And now we're being asked to sort of move forward another $50 billion or so on unemployment benefits and services. At this 11.2% error rate, does that mean we're going to have another $5 billion that is going to be spent improperly? I mean, is the math correct?
Well, all your numbers are correct, Congressman. And let me tell you that we have a very aggressive plan with the states to try to work on this number quickly. It's very difficult to do anything quickly in the UI system and show results because of the data lag time. But I think we've given you some materials, and we're happy to give you more about what we're doing. Number one, we have set targets now with the states. Each state has an interagency team, because in the variety of states there are a variety of people who touch UI, whether through reemployment or direct benefit services. We have brought the 11 largest states together to work in a cohort, not because their rates are the worst, but because their numbers are so large that they can help us drive the number down. We've put a new website up so that there's complete transparency about both the number and the dollar amount that each state is paying in improper payments. We've given states $191 million in money that we've cobbled together so that they can advance their use of the SIDES program or their use of the national database of new hires. We've identified for each state in a pie chart that I think we provided to each of you what their root causes were so that they could work with us on getting down the root causes, whether it's separation issues where employers aren't timely in their getting back to the state about the reason for separation, or whether it's someone continuing to collect after they've gotten a job. I think we've put together, and lastly, we've actually identified 6 states that have rates over 10% and are giving them targeted technical assistance to get their rates down. This is a partnership program with the states, and you're going to hear from a state director on the next panel, and I know she'll be able to make this case much more accurately than I. But I don't think any of us really understand what the unemployment numbers have done to state workforce people. I mean, they've been inundated with requests, and I would venture that every state has shifted people from the kinds of integrity issues that we all care about and they care about into making sure people get their check in a timely manner. I hope that as the rates come down a little bit in states, they'll be able to shift those employees back to integrity issues.
Yeah, well, and thank you for that. And I know, this is a Congress, obviously, that is looking to save and make sure that every amount of waste, fraud, and abuse is not there. And what suggestion would you have to make sure that we, as Congress, is making sure that the department and the administration and the states are held accountable for making sure we're not going to have an 11% improper payment rate, because that's a huge amount of money that's going out the door.
It's unacceptable, Congressman. And I would say to you, for the length of my time that I have in the future in this office, hold my feet to the fire. You know, call me up to your office, get your staff on the phone. We will have quarterly results, and if we're not showing progress, you need to help me and give me more ideas. We have put together a plan that has literally taxed my UI staff in the national office and the regional offices, and they are enthusiastically embracing the extra workload. But I am open to new ideas that you might have. You may have things from your state and your state administrator. You know, we work very closely with the states. There's not an administrator that I don't know personally, and we work closely with NASWA. We have no pride of authorship on what we've done. We're willing to try these out. If this doesn't get us where we are, if we need to add new measures, please be open and tell us. So we look forward to working with you on this. I do not want to leave this position with the improper payment rate where it is now. I'd like it well below 10%.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Berg's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary.
Morning.
You know, maybe I'm looking at this very simply, but one of my frustrations is this is the 10th time we've extended this, all right? And since the major stimulus package, nothing's changed. I mean, you talk about this money going into the economy and stimulating spending, but we really haven't seen that happen. We're still at 9%. The economy's bleak. I mean, I agree that it's about jobs, but I also am concerned that we don't have anything innovative, anything that's changing. We're just doing the same thing. And so you mentioned earlier that there's 16 million unemployed people.
Yes, sir.
And there's about 3 million jobs. I guess my first question is, it seems to me that we ought to be doing everything we can in this program to fill those 3 million jobs with the people that are unemployed. That should be our #1 focus. My other frustration, and this is just kind of the big picture, is everything's temporary. This temporary nature does not provide the security and the stability that people need, either those that are unemployed or that our economy needs. And, you know, obviously I've said this several times in our state is, you know, we're at 3.5% in North Dakota. We didn't have a jobs bill in North Dakota, and, you know, we understand there the government doesn't create jobs, the private sector creates jobs. And so we need to create an environment that encourages that to happen. And we need to create a system here that recognizes that and works with that private sector to encourage hiring and to fill those jobs and fill that capacity. I mean, there's a couple stories today in the press back home that are really disheartening. People that have lost their businesses in other states that have come to North Dakota, living in trailers, trying to pull things together. And there's a lot of optimism in those people. But the sad thing is this dead economy, they're never going to be able to recover from that. They've lost their businesses, they've lost their homes, and they're starting over at 60 years old. And so, again, this whole thing, I think we need to get back to the focus of trying to create those jobs. And I'm a strong believer that these solutions are not going to come from us in Washington. These solutions are going to come from the states. And so one of the core things that I want to talk to you about is we have a federal waiver, if I understand it correctly, at the federal point, but we don't have the waiver at the state. And so you know, I guess maybe if you could just explain to me the federal waiver process that we have.
Well, under the unemployment insurance program, we have no waiver authority. Under the Workforce Investment Act, which is the subject of another committee, we have more liberal waiver authority in many areas. And North Dakota is the recipient of many of those waivers under the Workforce Investment Act program. But you know, you haven't given us statutory authority to waive anything in the unemployment insurance program.
Is that something that's been asked for in the President's bill?
No. We haven't done really anything to the underlying Unemployment Insurance Act in this bill. These, as you say, these are temporary programs. But I think while your state has the blessing of great natural resources, it has done really a lot of things right. I mean, you were able to come back from Mother Nature's natural disasters and floods this year in a much stronger way than many of your other neighboring states were able to do so quickly. So you're doing a lot of things right. But one of the things the President's bill does, sir, is recognize the fact that we don't know everything in Washington, and it gives states a menu of options so that they can figure out whether wage insurance is right for them, whether, you know, self-employment assessment, that program is right for them, or whether they just want to build up their REA and RES programs. So I think we're on the same page there. We may have differences in other areas, but I think we definitely agree with you that states know better about how to build their own local economy, how to respond to their employers, and we give them a menu of options.
Well, I understand the rhetoric, but I don't see the action. And so I guess I would just challenge you to, as we're looking at this, as we're debating this, that we look for those areas of waivers and flexibility within UI, both at the federal level and the state, to kind of move that forward.
Happy to work with you on that, sir. I'm not a rhetoric person. I'm an action person. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Mr. Crowley for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And
Good morning.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Rhetoric has its place, so
You must have been a preacher
dismissive.
in a former life.
No comment over here.
boy, I wish we all were North Dakota. I wish we all had a
I know,
3.5% unemployment rate, and unfortunately, New York, it's as Mr. Reed knows, it's at 8%, if not higher, and so I appreciate my colleagues' remarks, but also note that other states are even at higher levels than New York in terms of unemployment. In fact, we feel kind of lucky that we're only at 8% when we look at other states. What I would remind my colleagues is that this portion, the UI benefit extension, is part and parcel of the president's overall jobs bill, creating jobs. And I say it's a part of it. It's not a small part and not an insignificant part. People who receive unemployment, Madam Secretary, they have to be engaged in trying to find employment. Is that not correct?
That's correct, sir. That's the work search piece of every state law.
These folks aren't sitting home and just collecting a check. They have to be out looking for work, looking for a job, right?
That's correct.
The most a person in New York State can receive is $405 per week. Now, just a little calculating, that's $1,620 per month. Now, we've gotten, I think, past the folks who were steered into improper mortgages. Most of those mortgages have been worked out. But now you're really delving into folks who have been, unfortunately, not due to their own malfeasance, but now find themselves out chronically out of work. For many people, half a year. For others, a full year, a year and a half. Is that not true?
Actually, 46% of all the unemployed have been employed more than 26 weeks.
Now, I'm just going to look at a mortgage, not that one would have today. I'm just going to, a homeowner. Someone who may have a number of years ago at a 5.8% mortgage rate, which was reasonable not even 10 years ago. 30-year fixed mortgage. It comes to about $2,100 per month just to pay the mortgage. Now, at $1,620 per month in New York, and that's for a $350,000 home, which, just to clarify for folks, so my father was a New York City detective in 1964. The home that he purchased in Woodside, Queens, was for $24,250. 3-bedroom, 1-bath. Today, the city of New York says that house, for tax purposes, is worth over $500,000. That's on a detective salary, a New York City police officer salary. Now, I'm even coming down from that. $350,000. They're already into this house now for about 10 years. They've been paying $2,100 a month for 10 years. Now they don't have a job. They're out of work. These are hardworking folks who have been working all their lives, continue. They want to play by the rules. They've played by the rules. They're continually looking for work, and they can't find it. And they're barely holding on to their home if they're getting that $1,620, not to mention food, not to mention gas, not to mention possibly tuition, not to mention any extracurricular activities for their children, utilities. Isn't that not correct?
Absolutely, sir.
So the giveaway of $1,620 per month barely, if they're lucky, can keep them in their home. Is that not correct?
That's correct. And don't forget, sir, they pay taxes on that $1,600, so they don't get the whole thing.
One last point. These folks are actively out looking for work. Is that, as we said before, correct?
In order to be eligible, yes, sir.
They
have
are
to.
not really, they can't be down on Wall Street protesting, can they?
I don't think so,
No.
sir. I
So
don't think they have the money
what
to
I
take
would suggest
the metro.
to all my colleagues, they're not down on Wall Street protesting or anywhere in this country protesting because they're too busy out looking for work. Deny them unemployment insurance. Deny them that. Maybe deny their ability to keep their home and pay for their kids to grow up properly. You're going to find them. These are not just the rabble who are down at Wall Street. These are not just professional protesters. You put people on, take unemployment away and see what happens. It's not a threat. It's just a reality. People lose all hope. And I would just suggest that. The Hoover Dam, the Triborough, now the Robert F. Kennedy Bridge, the interstate highway system was built not by private industry. They may have built it, contracted out with the assistance of government. And a great portion of what the president is talking about is not just unemployment. This is part of it. But he's talking about investment in infrastructure. He's talking about helping create employment so that we can help people help themselves and keep their homes. And I just remind all my colleagues of that point. I yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Reed from New York is recognized for 5
Thank you,
minutes.
Chairman. Madam Secretary, I appreciate you being here today. I just wanted to follow up on a piece of your testimony that you gave to Mr. Doggett. You said that cutting off unemployment insurance would lead to catastrophic situation. And in that response, you said that the people that would be denied benefits would move to long-term disability status. What do you mean by, why would they be going to long-term disability status?
Well, sir, if you look, and I'd be happy to get the numbers for your staff, if you look at the increase to people who are considered long-term disabled, permanently disabled, the number has almost doubled during the recession. And I think,
is that because there's more disability out there, or they're just applying for whatever benefits, even though they may not be entitled to them? I don't see a growing populace of disabled Americans in my district or around the country, and yet you're telling me from your perspective what people are going to do is move to disability status.
well,
Has their disability status changed
if I might,
physically?
sir,
Yeah.
I would propose, and I would certainly be open to what you've seen in your population. I think many people work 40 hours a week who could be claimed as long-term disabled because of long-term illnesses, because of permanent disabilities that they have, but they're able to work. But if they can't find a job and they can't feed themselves and their families, what other option do they have?
Well, and that's where I'm trying to get to your mindset. Because when I go back to my district and I talk to my farmers and I talk to folks, they say, we can't find people to come work. Yet in some of these counties, we're at 9%, 10% unemployment. Why do you believe that people will choose to do inappropriate things in order to put a roof over their heads, as opposed to, in my opinion, do what's right and maybe go to work on a farm or in an underemployed status in order to get off the unemployment roll? Why do you automatically assume that they're going to move to long-term disability when they're not disabled, as your testimony suggests to me? Why do you assume that from the administrative point of view now?
I don't think I'm assuming that they're doing anything inappropriate. I said that there are people that have disabilities but have chosen to work, and in a place where they can't find work, what other option do they have? In terms of farm work and temporary seasonal work, I think we've done a much better job working with states to advertise those jobs. Quite frankly, I don't think people knew that those jobs existed. They didn't know what they were.
We would love to work with you to publicize that, so we definitely will
Absolutely.
reach out to you. I really want to focus, my heart of my questioning this morning is, I'm greatly concerned how we're paying for all this. Because when I went back, and this is a whole new area for me, okay, so bear with me, maybe I'm misunderstanding the program. But in New York State, the loans that were advanced to the state came due, and the governor had no choice but to put a surcharge on the employees. And as I went back to my district in August, I think it was $27 per employee, that a lot of my small business owners were saying, Tom, I'm in dire straits. I ran 4 small businesses. When you impact a business on an unforeseen bill that impacts cash flow to the extent that some of these small business owners were receiving because they got a letter from the state saying that they owed this surcharge on their employee to pay back the loans that were advanced to the state, that is crippling them. They literally told me to my face that they were choosing between paying this bill for their unemployment surcharge or investing and hiring new people. So how do you reconcile, how are we going to pay for this without having the negative impact of the costs that come with it? Because it has to be paid for. I mean, this is real money. And so how do you say we're helping job creation by extending unemployment benefits when at the same time the bill for that is hurting the small business owners that are ultimately going to have to pick up the tab that hopefully will put the people back to work? Do you understand my concern?
I have to apologize, Congressman. I don't really understand what the surcharge is that the state is, and I will go back and learn
It's
more
the
about what.
interest-free loans that came due after 2 years that was advanced to the state because of the extended unemployment period of time.
Actually, 36 states borrowed.
Yep. We're one of them.
You're one of them, that's right. In fact, 16, over the course of the time we've been doing the loans, 16 states are continuing to borrow as of September. The reason they have to pay the interest back is so that they don't have to raise their FUTA tax.
Yep.
They don't lose the credit on that. So it could be that what New York did is put on a surcharge so they didn't raise the tax.
That's exactly what they did. That's exactly my understanding. But the small business owners are the ones that have to pay that because Albany just can't print the money. They have to go back to the business owners that are creating, that have to pay the bill, that are trying to create the jobs to get people off the unemployment rolls. It just doesn't make sense to me why we're doing this.
Well, the other option would be a permanent increase to their FUTA tax, and I think we could work with your staff to figure out what the numbers were and work with Albany to figure it out. So I understand it better. I apologize that I'm not as clear with why they're doing a surtax.
So you would agree raising the FUTA tax would not be conducive to job creation?
Oh, absolutely.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Chairman.
Perhaps you could answer his question in writing.
Through the chair. Yes, sir.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Mr. McDermott for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Reading the history of unemployment creation in 1935 in the Unemployment Act, or the Social Security Act 1935, the last issue that was argued on the last day in the Senate was, is there some kind of moral degenerative element to giving people unemployment insurance? They'll somehow get a weak soul and they will stay in their chair and wait for their unemployment check. The Republican Party has never believed unemployment insurance was good. Now, I would like you to explain, my colleague can't seem to get the picture. I want you to explain what it means to be.
Would the gentleman yield for just 1 second?
Yes.
I'd just like to remind the gentleman that he and I sponsored 2 of the extensions together for unemployment based on your last remark.
I understand.
I yield back.
Well, would the gentleman yield?
I'm not going to yield my time. You guys can, the chairman can give you some more.
Well, I think you're referring to me, Mr. McDermott.
Yes, I would like you to explain to the committee the term countercyclical. The idea that you put money into the fund when things are good, so that when things are bad, you have money to draw out. And what happens to states who, when things are good, say, well, let's drop the tax because we don't need the money. Look, we've got all this money in the pot. And then they wind up having to borrow.
Congressman, you're exactly right. I mean, some states were just hit extraordinarily hard, and no matter what they would have done, states like Michigan probably would have been hit no matter what. But the vast majority of the states, unlike your home state of Washington, did lower business taxes, without thinking about what would happen and let their trust funds get disproportionately low. I think that's the concern that the Department of Labor has with funding any of these innovations with trust fund money. We think trust fund money should be sacrosanct. It should be held there for the future and not used to fund novel ideas. That's why we think the president's right and in asking for additional money to fund these innovations that we would do as voluntary options under UI.
The thing that I would like you to also talk about is the National Bureau of Economic Research has recently done a study on this question about the moral degeneracy that comes from unemployment insurance. What's the conclusions of that report that were just released?
Yeah, they basically find it's completely unfounded in research. There's nothing to say that there's anything about unemployment insurance that depresses people's desire to work or anxiousness to work.
And the plan, the Georgia Works plan, how did that work? Was it successful?
Well, Actually, Congressman, as I said before you got here, they didn't use our money, so we don't have a lot of good data on it. They used other state money, and quite frankly, right now they're running out of money and the program's kind of dissolving. In terms of successful, looking at their outcomes in Georgia against regular outcomes using just regular Wagner-Pfizer services, they did get about a third of their people did find jobs, but if you just used Wagner-Pfizer services, twice as many people got jobs.
And today, what's the number of people looking for jobs as compared to the number of jobs available?
16 million full-time unemployed, and another 6 to 7 million who are working part-time, who are looking for full employment, and about 3 million jobs available.
So you're talking 22 million people looking for 3 million jobs.
That's correct.
So even in the best of circumstances, there are going to be a lot of people who are going to be in the situation that Mr. Crowley was describing.
Especially if they're in urban areas or rural areas, they're mostly high-impact areas.
Now, this is a little out of your neighborhood, but if you're an unemployed worker and you've reached 99 weeks, you've got nothing left.
That's correct.
And you've lost your health care benefits. What are you entitled to as an American in this society, besides food stamps?
Food stamps. Possibly you could go to the housing authority and get a housing voucher, but there's a long line in most areas for that, and the charity of your faith-based or community-based organization.
So we are basically saying to the middle class that have been unemployed for how many weeks, you said? What's the percentage?
44% have been unemployed more than 26 weeks.
So you now have no more unemployment benefits, and you are middle class yesterday, and today you are with food stamps.
Correct. And kids in college with student debt, and kids going to K-12 school that need books and supplies. Absolutely, sir.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. Chair would like to recognize Mr. Bustani from Louisiana for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome. Good to see you. I have some concerns about the static nature of those statistics that the gentleman from Washington laid out, and I think the job market is much more dynamic than what those statistics would lay out. But, in thinking about the purpose of unemployment benefits, clearly they're designed to provide financial support while an individual looks for another job. That's really the purpose. And none of us on this side of the aisle will deny the importance of the program for those who find themselves stuck in a situation. I mean, we've all supported the extension of this program. I know we've worked with our chairman to do this. But consistent with the purpose of the benefit, should there be a requirement that UI recipients must search for work every week? With only very few limited exceptions, perhaps for those expected to return to a former job? I mean, is that...
Congressman, each state law is slightly different, but every state law has a requirement for work search.
Well, I know there's a requirement in the Federal Extended Benefits Program. That's correct, right?
We follow state law with that, yes, sir.
Right. But with regard to the state UI program, which pays benefits when people first become employed, I mean, is there a requirement?
Yes, sir. Every state law has a requirement on their initial benefits as well.
Could you provide us where in statutes?
In each state law, sir?
Because I don't think that's the case.
Well, we work closely with Louisiana and Commissioner Eisen. We know what the work search is in Louisiana, so we can provide you that state law, and happy to provide whatever it is to other committee members. But it is a requirement for active beneficiaries to work to search for work. In some states, the requirement has a numerical, so you have to have at least 3 evidences of looking for work. In some states, it's as small as 1 evidence. In many of them, you do it electronically. In some states, you do it by returning a card. And in some states, you still, at certain points, have to come in and face-to-face.
Because the bottom line is, I mean, we need to make sure the program's working. I know someone earlier asked the question about overpayments, and, being chairman of the Oversight Subcommittee on Ways and Means, I'm concerned about making sure these programs are working to the best that we can assure, within the law that they are. And I am very concerned that the work requirement issue is something we need to probably take a closer look at to make sure that, that this is really the case. Because, I mean, I've heard a lot of anecdotal evidence back home, talking to employers, where someone will call and ask, you have any job openings? And they'll say, well, yeah, why don't you come in, send a resume, come visit with us? And they'll say, no, I just had to do this because it meets the requirement under the unemployment insurance benefit. I want to make sure that we're doing what we can to make sure that this program is working, that the intent of providing a bridge to getting people back into the workforce is what is really happening. And I mean, shouldn't the work requirement be at least as strong in week 1 as it is in week 99? I mean, there should be an incentive all the way through this process to get people to really do the job of getting out there and looking for work, because there are jobs. I mean, I think we got a dynamic labor market, even with high unemployment and all the problems. I talk to employers all the time who are struggling to find workers. In my state in Louisiana, we've got a lot of folks, a lot of businesses related to agriculture, farmers. Mr. Reed was mentioning this earlier. We've got seafood processing plants. They're looking for jobs. They're coming to me and saying, can you do something about the H-2B visa program? We need more workers. And yet we've got high unemployment of Americans here in this country. There's a disconnect, and somehow we got to get to the bottom of it. And I think at the heart of this could be understanding what steps we need to take to do the best we can with this work requirement. And I'd like your comments.
Well, this is a balance. As I said, we do this in this program in collaboration with the states, and I think all of us have a great respect for the state's critical role in this program. So rather than going in and saying, we're going to overrule state law on work search, what this proposal has done is mandated for anybody getting EUC when you decide to extend it, we will mandate both the reemployment assessment and the reemployment services. That gets to the same thing as work search. It means that face-to-face, somebody's got to come in, not just handing in a card, not just mailing something in. They've got to talk to somebody. They've got to understand why it's important to take a job when it's offered, because we don't know what the future is going to deliver. So I think if we talked about this, Congressman, we would probably agree that right now the best role we could take is to make sure that we're really mandating the RES and the REA. And in future, in terms of what this committee and the Senate would choose to do in underlying UI law, if you wanted to look at creating some kind of national standard for a work search requirement, I think we'd be willing to provide you technical assistance on that and work with NASWA.
Great. Thank you very much.
We may need to look at that. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. Secretary Oates, thank you very much for joining us today. We'll look forward to a continued dialogue, and that'll conclude our second panel. If members have additional questions, they'll submit them to you in writing, and we'd appreciate your responses for the record. This concludes the second panel. Thank you. For our third panel, we're going to be hearing from Marin Daly, Executive Director of Job Service North Dakota, Don Dean, an unemployed person from Philadelphia, Don Peterson, Director of Unemployment Insurance Workforce Project at the American Institute for Full Employment, Chris McConnell, Workforce Consultant with Allied Barton Security Services. Before we go to one special introduction, I would like to make a statement. We've been informed from the whip's office there's going to be a very long series of votes that's going to go in the next 15 to 20 minutes. I think we're going to have about 20 to 25 minutes before we go. I'd rather not have you all standing in limbo for 90 minutes while the floor process works itself out. Because of this, if we have time for questions, we'll begin questions, but what I'd like to ask your indulgence is if our members, and I know several will have questions, including me, if we could submit those to you in writing, and those could be responded to in writing, and we'll make sure that they're part of the permanent record on this, and I appreciate very much your time coming in to deal with this very critical issue. So thank you. With that, before we proceed with testimony, I'd like to recognize Mr. Berg to introduce his colleague from his home state.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to introduce Maren Daly, who's our first witness here on this panel. And she's the Executive Director of Job Service, or Unemployment in North Dakota. It's a cabinet-level department. She administers these programs. In fact, we worked together a long time, for the last 20 years. And so I'm just excited to have her here, and kind of, again, my hope is that we'll pull some of these ideas at the state level that are working at the state level and try and create a federal program that creates incentives for the right kind of things that get people back to long-term work. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Ms. Daly, you can proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. Chairman Davis and Ranking Member Doggett and members of the Subcommittee on Human Resources, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the President's proposals to help the long-term unemployed. As Congressman Berg introduced me, I'm Maren Daly with Job Service North Dakota, the state workforce agency that administers the unemployment insurance, labor exchange, and labor market information services. The Workforce Investment Act, Wagner-Pizer, and unemployment insurance programs are fully integrated within Job Services one-stop career centers. This seamless delivery system improves the transition of UI claimants to reemployment. A basic principle embraced by all states is rapid, effective reemployment of unemployed workers is critical to the economic well-being of individuals, families, and employers, in which in turn support the local and national economies. I'm encouraged to see a variety of options included in the President's proposal, but I encourage even more flexibility in this realm. By allowing maximum flexibility, states are able to implement strategies specific to the needs of their state, ultimately providing for faster economic progress with a more efficient use of tight resources. North Dakota's low unemployment, continued job and wage growth, among many other factors, make North Dakota unique. However, they do not shield us completely from reemployment struggles. While we have thousands of good jobs available, the skill sets of the worker base, and in many cases the location of these individuals, do not always correspond with the available jobs. Examples of our reemployment successes are readily available, and I would like to outline one of the more successful cost-effective approaches we've taken. I should note that this program could not have been undertaken without federal funding resources. And this is the type of situation in which the President's proposal and each state's intimate knowledge of the workforce needs of their own state can converge. There is strong competition for jobs available in North Dakota, and one of our primary goals is to help UI claimants be competitive contenders for these jobs. To this end, we've had excellent results in the past with our Reemployment Eligibility Assessment Program. REA focuses on individual case management services and creates an environment of coaching and support for discouraged unemployed workers. Springboarding off the success of the REA program, we developed a series of workshops focused on intensive reemployment activities and focused individual activities. These workshops were funded by Wagner-Pizer RES dollars through the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. The workshops were 4 days long and required a major time commitment from UI claimants. The workshops consisted of 1 day devoted to basic computer skills training and 3 days addressing skills identification, exploration of jobs to which the claimant skills would be transferable, effective job searches, writing good resumes and cover letters, and interviewing. All participants completed the workshop with an updated resume, a new understanding of how their skills could be transferred to another position, and with the confidence gained through a practice interview exercises. We have solid statistics proving the success of the workshops. The statistics showed a significant reduction in the time that the workshop participants spent on unemployment compared to the overall UI claimant duration in North Dakota. During the same period, the average claimant duration was 11.28 weeks. While this number is good compared to the rest of the country, the individuals that attended the workshops returned to work, full-time work, in 7.32 weeks on average. This is an improvement of almost 4 weeks, and this represents significant savings to the UI Trust Fund. Many things have been tried on a national basis. Some of them have been successful, and some of them not. In North Dakota, our UI claimants have greatly appreciated the availability of EUC benefits. These benefits have been a game changer for some. However, it could be argued a large portion of the EUC benefits paid in North Dakota could have been more effectively spent on focused reemployment efforts. Typically, under federally funded extended benefit programs, a minimum work search requirement exists. However, the 2008 EUC program does not require this, and instead provides that state law and policy regarding work search requirements be followed. In North Dakota, we have a large seasonal workforce that faces temporary layoffs over the winter, particularly in the construction industry. Because of this, our UI laws and policies are different than that would be seen in many other states. What this has led to is $24.75 million, or 43% of the extended benefits paid in North Dakota have gone to eligible UI claimants who will be returning to employment after a temporary layoff. In essence, these individuals have not faced a change in their normal employment status. I have submitted my written testimony. Mr. Chairman, I see my time is up, and I would invite you to check out the written testimony for a unique, cost-effective, simplified work share program that North Dakota has used. Thank you.
We appreciate your insights, especially the written testimony was quite illuminating, and thanks for your hard work up there. Now the chair recognizes Ms. Dean for her remarks.
Chairman Davis, Ranking Member Doggett, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me here today. My name is Dawn Dean. I am a resident of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Since June of this year, and like so many others these days, I am unemployed through no fault of my own and supporting myself and my 9-year-old daughter on unemployment insurance. Too often these days, unemployed Americans like me are reduced to either statistics or stereotypes. We don't have names and faces. We're either one of 14 million who are out of work, or we're lazy people, happy to sit home collecting unemployment rather than actively looking for jobs. But I'm not just a statistic, and I'm not lazy. For the past 20 years, I have worked in the field of human resources, and I've held my 3 previous jobs for 7, 8, and 3.5 years. In spite of all my hard work, right now, I am unemployed. Thankfully, I'm able to receive unemployment insurance benefits, which are what is sustaining me and my daughter while I diligently look for new work. As a human resources professional, I am very aware of how to diligently and strategically search for a new job, and I am doing just that. Like tens of millions of other Americans, each day I engage in a thorough and multifaceted search for employment. And I've been doing so since I lost my job in June. I have registered my resume with all of the major websites, and I have applied for approximately 40 jobs so far. In addition, I have attended 4 different career fairs since being laid off. And through them, I have applied for about 50 additional jobs. I have yet to hear from a single employer from any of these applications. I also understand the importance of networking, so I've reached out to all of my friends and former colleagues asking for their assistance in finding a new job. I've gone to my local one-stop career center to look for open jobs. I have visited and or contacted the offices of city council and state representatives to see if they have any resources for their constituents who are searching for jobs. I am not only applying for jobs in my field, I am looking more widely for all sorts of administrative jobs, just because I want to work and support my daughter and myself. Because I know that I'm not the only one in this situation, and because I have skills to offer others who are struggling with unemployment, I also volunteer at a local center, community center, and church, helping others with their job searches. Finally, I am auditing a course at Villanova University that will prepare me to take an exam to receive a professional human resources certification, hopefully enhancing my value to the job market. Right now, I thank God for unemployment insurance because it is allowing me to keep up with my mortgage and provide the bare necessities of food and transportation. I lived well within my means when I was working, but even our modest lifestyle is a challenge now. I could not afford to keep up with health insurance right now. My daughter and I have no coverage, which is very frightening. I am working with a housing counselor to see if I can restructure my mortgage and lower the monthly payments. I've applied for a subsidy to pay my monthly gas bill and electric bills. I've had to stop my daughter's extracurricular activities like dance class, which she loved, and was not able to buy many back-to-school supplies or clothes for her. And I'm looking for other ways to continue to scale back on our expenses, even though I've already eliminated everything that isn't strictly necessary already. Until I find new work, unemployment insurance is our necessary source of income. My state benefits began in June and will end in December. And while I hope that I have a new job before the end of the year, the absolute lack of any success I've had so far really worries me. Thus, while I do not want to have to receive federal unemployment insurance benefits, with the unemployment rate so high right now, I just don't see how Congress can even think about letting these important programs expire. If they do, my daughter and I and millions of other families like us might have no safety net, no lifeline in the new year. Quite simply, reauthorizing these important federal unemployment insurance programs is simply the single most important thing for this Congress to do right now, along with making some real efforts to create good jobs for millions like me who just want to work. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dean. Mr. Peterson?
Chairman Davis, Ranking Member Daggett, and members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to testify. The American Institute for Full Employment is a nonprofit think tank. We consult with states and specialize in wage subsidy designs similar to the Bridge to Work program. We applaud the Obama administration and the Republican leadership for their bipartisan interest in turning an unemployment support into an employment support. This testimony addresses two pieces of the legislation, the Bridge to Work and state flexibility. Briefly, we think Bridge to Work has great promise, but should be modified as follows. Eliminate the employer mandate. Simplify by letting employers pay the full wage. Increase the subsidy from 8 to 13 weeks. Let states help claimants earlier than 6 months. Give states flexibility, but require return on investment. Extend Bridge to Work to the regular UI program. Half of our regular UI claimants go jobless for nearly 6 months, and 3/4 of our emergency benefit claimants went jobless for another 10 months. Even though we spent $50 billion in emergency benefits alone in the last year, trying to help them get back on their feet. EUC wages claims averaged over $9,000. Our wage subsidy costs under $4,000. The math is both obvious and compelling. We have studied UI-specific wage subsidy programs plus Georgia Works. First was Oregon's Jobs Plus program. Operated for more than a decade, the program helped over 10,000 claimants. Over 80% of the participants landed jobs and saw an average wage gain of over 15%. Georgia Works is an employer-based training program that has been replicated in a handful of states. Claimants keep their benefit check while volunteering with an employer for up to 8 weeks for a minimum of 24 hours per week. Over 10,000 job seekers have participated. Texas Back to Work, launched in 2010, has received USDOL's Innovation Award for its program design. A subsidy is $2,000 over 16 weeks. It has served over 20,000 claimants and over 3,000 employers. 63% of the job seekers have been successfully placed. Earnings retention was 99.4%, and the program has been replicated in Utah and Nevada. These wage subsidy programs succeed because they provide real training in a real job, allow job seekers to gain a foot in the door. They are cost neutral or cost savers, and our economic development programs. Over 80% of the employers said it helped with cost, capacity, and/or expansion. Based on our research in these programs, we offer 4 recommendations for Bridge to Work. 1, Employers have repeatedly told us that simplicity makes or breaks a program. Bridge to Work has an employer mandate that none of the 4 state UI initiatives includes. It requires employers to hire claimants within 24 weeks of program participation. But the core of any wage subsidy program is to encourage employers to take a chance on a job seeker that they would not otherwise hire. Our experience suggests that abuse is rare. We recommend eliminate the employer mandate to hire and give states the flexibility to design program safeguards based on their own state needs. 2, increase state flexibility to allow the wage subsidy to be up to 13 weeks to match the 90-day probationary period used by many employers. This allows participants to learn higher skilled jobs and gives state staff more flexibility to match workers with opportunities. 3, eliminate the complication of 2 payers for the worker by paying the subsidy directly to the employer and requiring the employer to give the worker a paycheck like any other new worker. 4, the net cost of a wage subsidy program can determine whether it becomes a legacy or a loser. Timing of placement with the employer is key. The earlier the placement, the more works of benefits that can be saved. Unfortunately, the earliest Bridge to Work would start is about 6 months after a claimant lost their job, because that's when EUC begins. Early placement also helps claimants avoid costly unemployment spells that drain their savings. We recommend you allow states to offer Bridge to Work to claimants earlier than 6 months. The Jobs Act includes 2 other provisions allowing states innovative program authority. We support state program flexibility and recommend that when proposals are vetted, that return on investment is a requirement. We also would ask you to allow states to use regular benefits to fund a Bridge to Work program for their regular UI claimants with the improvements noted here. We estimate that a modified Bridge to Work initiative can provide opportunities to 300,000 to 400,000 long-term UI claimants each year, and in doing so, save the federal government over $1.5 billion and states $270 million a year. It is important not to miss the enormity of the opportunity we have here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peterson. Mr. McConnell?
Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'd like to offer some observations from a private sector employer's experience working with many local workforce agencies to recruit folks on UI and other federal benefits. I provide general consulting services and project management to public, private, and nonprofit clients in the area of housing, human services, and workforce development. For the past 4 years, Allied Barton Security Services has been one of my clients. Allied Barton has over 50,000 employees and 100 offices located across the United States. As such, Allied Barton is a significant entry-level employer in scores of local labor markets. We recruit almost exclusively for security officers. These are full-time jobs with benefits, including health care after 90 days. We also promote from within and can provide a clear career ladder from security officer to supervisory and management positions. My role with Allied Barton is to help them make links with local workforce agencies and identify policies and programs that help us recruit good staff and, whenever possible, defray the costs of recruitment, staff training, and wages. In light of our experience in this realm, I'd like to share just a couple of thoughts on our interaction at the local level over the past 4 years. Short-term funding windows can be very problematic to administer down on the ground. And in this respect, I would ask you to be mindful of how difficult the process can be for getting funds from here through the state capitals and down to the counties and cities. 2 weeks ago, I was in a meeting just outside of Detroit, and they wanted us to hire 20 people in 10 days because one of their on-the-job training budgets for displaced workers on UI would be up at the end of the month. We would have loved to, and we will eventually hire those folks, but it might take us a couple of months or more depending upon what our recruitment flow is like. Another issue is how certain funding streams are only allowed to be applied to certain groups of people, like those with a longer duration on UI. As an employer, we need to see the people that best fit our job opportunities, regardless of when they might have lost a job or what their benefit status might be. So it's frustrating for all of us down on the ground when a local job developer has to tell my recruiter that, no, we can't get some help with the training costs on these folks because they've only been out of work for X number of months, as opposed to this other group of folks who have been out of work Y number of months. Of all the programs we've worked with across the country, and we've worked in New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Texas, Illinois, and many, many others, wage subsidy is the best one that we've found. Incentives like wage subsidy do exactly what they're meant to do. They give an employer a reason to look a little harder at a particular individual. Let me be clear. Like most employers, we have plenty of applicants these days. In some districts, as many as 30 for each job opening. So if the federal or local government wants us to focus on particular folks, well, these incentives are a good place to start. Plus, when we generate revenue from an area of our business where we had never expected to generate revenue, this improves our bottom line, makes us more competitive, which in turn makes it easier for us to grow our business and hire more people, hopefully via these same programs. Wage subsidy programs tend to be cleaner. We hire, we pay our employees, the rate and duration of the subsidy is previously established. There's nothing that gets in the way of the employer-employee relationship, and this is key for us, as I would imagine it is for many employers. We like hiring people. We want to pay them a prevailing wage, train them effectively, and hold them accountable for their work. This is what we do, and we're good at it. Wage subsidy respects that relationship like no other program available. And from a less self-interested perspective, I would maintain that another strength of wage subsidy is that it is a post-employment program. The government funding comes through in direct relation to the money that the former UI recipient is earning. Lastly, I would comment on any program models that you're looking at that keep folks on benefits and also try to put them in the workplace. For my client, Allied Barton, any program like this is a no-go proposition because from a legal standpoint, we can't have anybody working or performing job functions that isn't a direct employee. And I would imagine that we're probably not the only employer that would say something like that. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. McConnell. You may have heard the buzzer several minutes ago during Mr. Peterson's testimony. That signaled the beginning of this very long vote series. Rather than hold you hostage for about 90 minutes, I think what we're going to do, as I mentioned the possibility at the beginning of your testimony, we'll be submitting questions to you. For the record, we'd appreciate a response back in writing. Look forward to a continued dialogue on this critical issue. Ranking Member Doggett and I are both personally committed to finding creative ways to address both the inefficiencies and the process problems within the government space and ways to help folks find a path back to work very quickly. And appreciate your testimony today, your time invested in this. This will be an ongoing dialogue. And again, thank you very much. This concludes the hearing today.
You too. Thanks.
Where do you live?
Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
You do? Okay. Yeah. Is that where you've lived most of your life?
Yes, that's where I was. Yeah, out there.
Yeah.
So, are you up that way?
No, I live in Denver.
Oh, okay.
So,
wow, that's
quite a
a
ways
ways.
away from
Yeah, it
where
is a
you're at
ways.
there.
That's it. But we're still fighting the same.